She didn't know his name when they put the ring on her finger. That was the part she kept coming back to in the days that followed. Not the ceremony itself, brief and cold as a transaction between banks. Not the black cars that appeared outside her apartment 3 weeks earlier, or the men in expensive suits who stood at her door with an envelope and an expression that left no room for the word no. Not even the moment she signed her name on a document she was not allowed to read in full. What stayed with her, what lodged itself in her chest like a splinter too deep to reach, was the simple fact that she had stood beside a man at an altar and did not know what to call him. Kenji Mori. She learned it afterward, the way you learn the name of a storm after it has already passed through. If you've ever felt like a decision was made about your life before you were even asked, stay with this story, because what happened to Amara Osi in the spring of her 28th year was exactly that. And what she discovered inside that forced arrangement would rewrite everything she thought she understood about the 3 years she had spent simply trying to survive. And if this is your first time here, take a moment and subscribe to the channel, because the story we're about to tell you doesn't end where you think it does. Amara had come to Osaka 4 years earlier with a degree in architectural conservation, a suitcase that was too heavy for one person to carry alone, and a grief she hadn't yet learned how to name. Her father, Emmanuel Ose, had died 18 months before her arrival in Japan. The official cause was cardiac arrest. The unofficial cause was the kind of thing people in her family whispered about and then immediately stopped whispering about, in the way that people do when they are afraid of what the next sentence might bring. She didn't push. She was 24 and exhausted, and she needed somewhere to go that wasn't home, where every room smelled like him and nothing had been moved since the funeral. Japan chose her as much as she chose it. A research fellowship, a small stipend, a shared apartment in Namba with a woman named Sayo, who collected ceramic frogs and left jasmine tea on the counter every morning without explanation. It was a quiet life. It was supposed to stay quiet. For 2 years it did. Amara worked. She studied the structural memory of old buildings, the way certain materials held history inside them, the way skin holds scars. She learned enough Japanese to navigate the city and enough silence to navigate herself. She made no enemies. She asked no difficult questions. She existed at the pleasant perimeter of a country that was not hers, careful and contained and grateful for the smallness of her days. Then her fellowship was extended through a private architecture firm, Mori Design and Infrastructure. She thought nothing of it. The firm was prestigious, the projects were beautiful, and the salary meant she could finally afford to stop counting the cost of groceries. She thought it was luck, she thought it was timing. She thought about a lot of things that turned out not to be true. The first time she saw Kenji Mori, he was standing at the far end of a conference room on the 14th floor of his own building, looking out at the city as if it owed him something. He was tall in the way that stillness makes a person seem tall. He wore a dark suit with the kind of tailoring that doesn't announce itself. His hands were clasped behind his back. He did not turn when she entered the room with the rest of the new associates. She noticed him the way you notice a shift in air pressure before weather arrives. Something changed in the room when he was in it. Not dramatically, not with noise, just a kind of gravitational rearrangement, the way small objects lean toward a larger mass without understanding why. He turned eventually, looked at each person in the room in a way that was professional and thorough and revealed nothing. When his eyes reached her, they paused, 1 second longer than the others. She told herself it was her imagination. It wasn't. She found out about the Yakuza connection the way most people who are not looking for something find it. By accident, through a door she wasn't supposed to open, literally. A wrong corridor in the administrative building, a room she mistook for the project archive, and 2 men having a conversation in rapid, low Japanese that stopped the moment she appeared in the doorway. She apologized and left, but she had been standing there long enough to hear a word she recognized. Kumicho. Boss. And she had seen the deference in the posture of the men, the kind of deference that doesn't come from salary structure. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't know who to tell. She filed it in the back of her mind under the category of things that were not her business, and went back to her drafting table and her calculations and her careful, bounded life. 6 weeks later, the black cars came. There were 2 of them. She was walking back from the convenience store at 8 in the evening, a bag of groceries in each hand, when they pulled up beside her in a synchronized movement that could not have been coincidental. 3 men got out. The one who spoke to her was polite in the precise, deliberate way that makes politeness feel like its opposite. He said, "There is a meeting requested tonight. At an address he named, he said your attendance is expected. He said, a car is available for your comfort." He did not say what would happen if she declined, but the shape of the sentence made it unnecessary. She went. She told Sayo she'd be late. She sat in the back of one of the black cars with her grocery bags on her lap, because no one had thought to take them from her, and she looked out the window at a city she had thought she understood. And she understood that she had been wrong. The address was a restaurant that was closed for the evening. The table had been set for 2. Kenji Mori was already there. He poured tea without being asked. He thanked her for coming, with the mild courtesy of someone who has never genuinely been refused anything and has therefore developed a kind of theoretical gratitude. He told her, in careful, precise English, that he intended to marry her. He told her it would be within the month. He told her that arrangements had been made to extend her visa, to consolidate her employment status, and to ensure that her life would continue undisturbed. He did not ask. He informed. Amara put her hands flat on the table and looked at him with the expression her mother called the face that meant, "I am about to say something that will cost me something, and I have decided it is worth the cost." She said, "You have confused me with someone who has no options." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You have more options than you know, but right now, fewer of them are safe than you realize." She drove home with her groceries, and her fear and a feeling she couldn't quite name yet, something between fury and the specific, hollow sensation of a trap that has just closed around a life you were still building. She tried to refuse. She spent 2 days trying. She called the consulate and got a recording. She called a lawyer whose name Sayo gave her and received a call back from a different number, a man who told her very gently that he was sorry, but he was unable to take her case. She searched Kenji Mori's name and found the architecture firm, a philanthropic foundation, 3 real estate acquisitions, and nothing that would hold up in a police report. The Mori name was clean in the way that power knows how to be clean, scraped of evidence, polished until it reflected only what it chose to show. On the 3rd day, a woman came to her apartment. She introduced herself as Hana Mori, Kenji's older sister, and she sat at Amara's kitchen table and drank the jasmine tea that Sayo left and said, "I know this isn't what you would have chosen. I know what it feels like to be told how your life will go. I'm not here to convince you it's right. I'm here because Kenji asked me to tell you one thing, and I want to tell you something else after. What Kenji asked her to say, you will be safe. What Hana said on her own, he has been watching you for 2 years. Not the way men watch women. The other way, the way you watch something you are trying to protect before the danger arrives." Amara asked what danger. Hana looked at her hands, said, "That is his story to tell, and he will tell it when he trusts that you can receive it without running. Which I think," she added, looking at Amara with the particular assessment of a woman who has spent her life calibrating the durability of others, "will be sooner than he expects. And here is where you need to understand something about who Amara Ose was, because it changes everything that comes after." She was not a woman who accepted powerlessness. She had grown up in a household where her father, Emmanuel, had made a life out of resistance to the idea that other people's structures were permanent. He was an architect too. He built schools in places that hadn't had them. He argued with local governments, and won more than he lost, and laughed at the ones he didn't win and went back again. He told Amara, "Every building begins as a refusal to accept that nothing is there." His death had not broken that in her. It had buried it. But buried is not the same as gone. She married Kenji Mori on a Tuesday in March, in a ceremony attended by 30 people she had never met, and Sayo, who held her hand during the part with the rings and did not say anything, which was the most useful thing anyone could have done. The house she moved into was in a private residential district in Ashiya, 40 minutes from the city center. It was a modernist building, horizontal and considered, surrounded by old pine trees that had been growing there long before anything else on that street. She had a studio on the east side, which she had not asked for and had been given anyway, already stocked with the drawing materials she used at the office. She stood in the middle of it on her first morning and felt something she did not expect, recognition, as if the room had been designed not just to specifications, but to attention. Someone had paid attention to who she was. She did not thank him for it. Not yet. She and Kenji existed in the house the way two weather systems exist in adjacent geography, aware of each other, not yet overlapping. He was gone before she woke most mornings and home after she had finished dinner, which she ate alone at a table that was too large for solitude. He did not intrude on her work. He did not try to explain himself. He answered her direct questions directly and offered nothing extra. She asked him once, "What exactly are you afraid of?" Not generally, for me specifically. He said, "Someone inside my organization has decided that my succession should not follow its intended path. This person has identified that my most productive destabilization would come through an attack on something I care about. I have spent 3 years ensuring that I appear to care about nothing that can be taken." She heard the weight of the sentence, said, "And now." He said, "Now there is a marriage recorded in 2 countries which changes the strategic geometry considerably." She said, "You married me to make me a target." He said, "I married you to give you the protection of being a target inside my circle instead of outside it." There is a significant difference. I would have preferred to explain this before the ceremony. I was advised against it. She left the room. Not in anger exactly. In the specific vibrating kind of stillness that precedes a decision. But give him this, and it costs her nothing to admit it now. He did not lie to her after that. Every time she asked a direct question, he gave her a direct answer. It was not warmth. It was something she found herself respecting more than warmth, which can be performed. Honesty in someone with enough power to avoid it entirely is a different thing. It is a choice. Slowly, the house became less like a territory and more like a place. She started leaving her drawings on the common table. He looked at them with the careful attention he gave everything. Once, he moved a pencil she'd left on a plans drawing and placed it in the tin on the shelf, and she found it there the next morning and felt something shift in her chest, small but real. She started asking about the buildings. His architecture firm did real work. Beautiful work, some of it. A school complex in Kyushu, a community center outside Kobe that was designed around natural light in a way that suggested someone had thought seriously about what it felt like to spend a day inside a building. She asked him about the community center. He talked about it for 40 minutes without stopping, and it was the longest she had ever heard him speak, and his face during those 40 minutes was the face of someone who had forgotten, briefly, that he was also something else. She understood then that he was not a simple thing. She had not needed him to be. But understanding the full dimension of him rearranged her fear into something more complicated and more honest. Do not miss what happens next, because this is the moment everything becomes irreversible. 6 weeks into the marriage, a man named Daichi Kuroda came to dinner. He was the second-ranking figure in Kenji's organization, precise and cordial in the way of someone who has made a study of being underestimated. He brought a gift, expensive wine, and sat at the table and talked about architecture and real estate, and said nothing of consequence for 2 hours, and when he left, Kenji's posture changed in a way Amara had never seen. Something in his shoulders, not fear, worse than fear, recognition of a specific kind of threat. She asked, "Is he the one?" Kenji said, "I don't know yet. I need evidence that he is not prepared for me to have." She asked, "What kind of evidence?" He looked at her. The first time he looked at her with something that wasn't calculation or courtesy, something more open, more uncertain. He said, "The kind that only exists in records I cannot access from inside my own organization. There is a set of financial documents that would confirm whether the money has been redirected. They are held in a notarial archive in Kobe. I have not been able to retrieve them because every person I would send is someone Kuroda can see." She sat with it. Then she said, "I'm an architect with a research background and a current authorization to access municipal preservation archives. I go into old buildings professionally. No one will think twice about me being in Kobe. He said, "This would put you in a position of risk." She said, "I've been in a position of risk since the moment your people showed up outside my apartment. At least this one is a position of my own choosing." Long pause. Then, "Yes." She went to Kobe on a Thursday. She carried her drawing materials and her professional credentials and the specific, composed exterior she had developed over 4 years of being the only person in a room who looked like her, in a country where that singularity was constant and required management. She found the archive. She found the documents. She photographed them on her phone, professionally, quietly, without drama, the way she did everything that mattered. She also found something she was not looking for. In the same archive, in a file adjacent to the financial records, she found a land rights document from 11 years ago. The property in question was a school site in Accra. The opposing party in a rights dispute over that land was listed as a construction company. The construction company's silent majority shareholder was listed as a holding group. The holding group's registered agent was a man named Daiichi Kuroda, and the architect who had originally designed that school, who had brought the dispute to the attention of a local legal organization, who had fought the land rights case and won and then died 18 months later of a cardiac arrest that the official documentation called uncomplicated. That architect's name was Emmanuel Osei. She sat very still in the archive room for a long time. Then she photographed that document too. She drove back to Asia. She sat in her studio until Kenji came home. When she heard the front door, she did not go to him. She waited. He came to her studio eventually, as she had known he would, drawn by the particular quality of her silence, the way you are drawn to a sound that has stopped. She placed both sets of photographs on the table. The financial documents first, then the land rights file. She watched his face, watched him find Kuroda's name, watched him understand what the second document was. He sat down, said, "I didn't know about your father's connection to Kuroda. When I first identified you as someone I needed to protect, I knew only that Kuroda had flagged your research fellowship as a potential intelligence risk, which told me you were either a threat or already a target. I spent 2 years determining which. I determined you were a target. I acted accordingly." She said, "My father died because of that land dispute." He said, "I believe so. I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry." She said, "That is not enough, and it is also not nothing." He said, "I know." There was a long silence in which the pine trees outside made the sound that pine trees make when the wind moves through them, dry and continuous, and indifferent to everything happening inside the house. She said, "What happens now?" He said, "Now I have evidence. Kuroda's position in the organization ends. He will be removed quietly in the way these things are done, and he will not recover his standing or his freedom of movement. The threat to you ends with it." She said, "And the marriage?" He said, "That is not a question I can answer for you." She asked, "But what do you want?" He looked at her for a long time. He was a man who had spent years building a face that gave nothing. She watched him take it apart, piece by piece, in real time, which was perhaps the most extraordinary thing she had seen in the whole extraordinary sequence of months since the black cars first appeared. He said, "I want you to stay. Not because of strategy, because I have spent 2 years paying attention to who you are, and I have not once wished you were different, and that has not happened to me before. I know this is not a sufficient reason, given everything that preceded it. I know the debt of what was done to you in the arranging of this is one I cannot fully repay. I am telling you what is true." She sat with it, the weight of it, the shape of it. The fact that it was true, which she could feel with the same accuracy she felt when a building was structurally sound, a knowledge in the body that did not require argument. She said, "I need time to stop being angry." He said, "I will be here." She said, "That is not a promise I would take lightly if I were you." He said, "I don't." What followed was not simple. She wants you to know that. She went home to Ghana for 3 weeks, the first time since her father's death, and she stood in the house where she had grown up and felt the grief she had been moving too fast to feel, and she called her mother and told her everything, which took 4 hours and 3 cups of tea and her mother's particular silence at the end of it, that was not cold, but was the silence of a woman rearranging everything she thought she knew. Her mother said, Your father always said the danger with the school case wasn't over. I thought he meant legally. I thought it was finished when he won. Amara said, "It wasn't finished, but it is now." She came back to the house in Ashiya on a Sunday evening. Kenji was in the kitchen, which she had not seen before, standing at the stove with the concentration of someone doing something they were not expert at and were refusing to be defeated by. There was a pot of something that smelled like soup, and a look on his face that she recognized as the face of a person who is trying to do a thing well for someone else, which is one of the few expressions that cannot be faked. She put her bag down. She did not announce herself. She sat at the kitchen table and watched him. He heard her eventually. Turned. The expression changed. She said, "I don't forgive the way it started." He said, "I know." She said, "But I'm here, and I intend to keep being here, and I need that understood clearly." He said, "Yes." She said, "And I want to know about the community center in Kobe. All of it. How you decided on the windows." He said, "That will take some time to explain." She said, "I'm not going anywhere." He turned back to the stove. She opened her bag and took out her sketchbook, and the sound of the pencil moving across the paper joined the sound of the cooking, and outside the pine trees were doing what they always did, indifferent and permanent, the way old things are when they have decided to stay. She would tell you now, Amara Ose, 3 years after a ring was placed on her finger before she knew the name of the man beside her. She would tell you that the forced beginning of something does not determine its truth. She would tell you that truth is not where a thing starts. It is what it becomes when two people are finally honest about what they see. She would tell you that she found her father's justice in a file she wasn't supposed to find, in a city she traveled to for someone else's reasons. She would tell you that some things are waiting for you in rooms you only enter because a door was opened that you didn't choose. She would tell you that she stayed not because she was made to. She stayed because she looked at the full shape of a man who had spent years paying attention to her, who had told her the truth every time she asked for it, who stood in a kitchen on a Sunday night trying to make soup well enough to welcome her home, and she decided that this was a thing she was willing to build something out of, slowly, with her own hands, on her own terms. Every building, her father used to say, begins as a refusal to accept that nothing is there. She thinks about that often now, standing at the drafting table in the East Studio, the pine trees outside the window, the pencil in her hand, and the sound of someone else moving through the house behind her, present and careful and chosen. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell us what part hit hardest. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because the next story we have waiting is about a woman who walked into a courtroom to lose and walked out having changed the only thing that mattered. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for being here. See you on the other side.